The secret recipe of the ancient Egyptians. How mummification was born. Imagine for a moment, you're in a museum in Turin, Italy, walking through corridors filled with ancient artifacts. Suddenly, your eyes meet something peculiar. A small, delicate figure rests in a fetal position inside a display case. It's a mummy, but not just any mummy. This one is different from all the others you've seen in books or documentaries. Its name, Fred. Yes, researchers affectionately named it Fred. And this mummy is about to reveal one of the best-kept secrets of ancient Egypt. Fred spent thousands of years lying in the hot sands near the banks of the Nile, in a vulnerable, almost childlike position. For approximately 5,600 years, it remained there, preserved in a way that seemed at first glance completely accidental. After all, what could be special about a body left exposed in the Egyptian desert? But here's the first great mystery. What if it wasn't an accident? What if, in fact, the ancient Egyptians had already mastered preservation techniques thousands of years before we imagined? What if the history of mummification needed to be completely rewritten? For decades, Fred remained untouched at the Egyptian Museum in Turin. No one dared disturb it with modern preservatives. No scientist had ventured to study it deeply. It was like a perfectly sealed time capsule, patiently waiting for human technology and curiosity to evolve enough to unveil its secrets. And then, finally, the moment arrived. A team of researchers decided it was time to discover the truth. What they found would completely change our understanding of the origins of Egyptian mummification. But before we reveal this revolutionary discovery, we need to go back in time a bit. We need to meet Jana Jones, the Egyptologist, who first suspected that something extraordinary was hidden in the shadows of ancient history. It was the 1990s. Jones was in her laboratory, hunched over a microscope, examining fabric fragments from prehistoric mummies. These wrappings were about 6,600 years old, placing them in an era long before the classical period of Egyptian mummification that we all know. As she adjusted the microscope's focus, Jones felt her heart race. What she was seeing couldn't be right. The ancient rags appeared to contain residues of an embalming resin, a compound that should only appear in much more recent mummies thousands of years later. It was an incredible feeling, she recalls to this day. Imagine the excitement. It was like discovering that Leonardo da Vinci not only painted the Mona Lisa, but had also invented digital cinema centuries earlier. It was a discovery that challenged everything we knew about the timeline of Egyptian civilization. But Jones was a careful scientist. She knew that a few microscopic cells weren't enough to revolutionize history. She needed concrete proof, meticulous chemical analyses that would leave no room for doubt. And if you're enjoying this incredible story about the secrets of antiquity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring fascinating stories like this that will make you see the past with different eyes. So began a journey that would take an entire decade to complete. 10 long years of chemical analyses, tests and retests. Jones jokes that she lived the mummy's curse during this period, but the team's determination never wavered. Finally, in 2014, the moment arrived. The team, led by archaeological chemist Stephen Buckley, an expert in mummification, confirmed the discovery. The wrappings really did contain embalming substances. The research was published in the renowned scientific journal PLOS One, and the academic world was shaken. That moment was revolutionary, declares Buckley, still emotional when remembering. But even with the publication, some experts remained skeptical. The problem was simple. The researchers only had the fabrics, the wrappings. They didn't have a complete mummy to study. The rags had been separated from their preserved owners long ago. How could they be absolutely sure that those chemical compounds were really part of an intentional mummification process? The answer was waiting patiently in Turin. Fred, the forgotten mummy, was about to enter the scene. When researchers finally decided to study Fred in detail, they knew they were dealing with something precious. This mummy had remained untouched since the early 20th century, when it arrived at the museum. It was a pure window into the past, without contamination from modern preservatives or previous scientific interventions. The team prepared a complete battery of tests. They would extract tiny samples and submit them to state-of-the-art chemical analyses. The goal: to identify each individual component of the embalming unguent used nearly 6,000 years ago. And then, by ingredient, the ancient recipe began to reveal itself. The base of the unguent was vegetable oil, nothing too surprising so far. But then came the really fascinating ingredients: plant gum and aromatic plant extracts. These last two components were absolutely crucial, and the researchers soon understood why. They had antimicrobial properties. In other words, these natural ingredients prevented the growth of bacteria and fungi that would otherwise destroy the body. The ancient Egyptians, without microscopes or laboratories, had empirically discovered substances that preserved human tissue. But here's what really left the team speechless. When they compared this recipe from 5,600 years ago with the unguents used at the height of Egyptian mummification 2,500 years later, the similarities were striking. It was almost the same formula. Think about that for a moment. The same chemical compounds that were used on Fred were used thousands of years later to preserve nobles and pharaohs, like King Tutankhamun himself. It was as if the ancient Egyptians had gotten the recipe right from the start and had perfected it over the millennia, but without ever abandoning the fundamental ingredients. It's very interesting to see these connections, comments Stuart Tyson Smith, an archaeologist at the University of California who followed the study with fascination. This represents an incredible piece of the puzzle that we didn't have until now. Our previous research is undoubtedly confirmed, she declared, probably with a smile from ear to ear. Now, let's dive a little deeper into the process itself, because it's absolutely fascinating. The ancient embalmers took the ingredients and created what Jones describes as a kind of sticky brown paste. Doesn't sound very glamorous, does it? But it was incredibly effective. There were two main ways to apply this balm. The first was to dip the linen strips directly into the paste before wrapping the body. The second was to apply the unguent directly to the deceased skin and then wrap them with the strips. By the way, if you're finding these discoveries as fascinating as we are, take the opportunity to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. We have much more content about mysteries and archaeological discoveries that will surprise you. But here's a crucial detail that differentiates prehistoric mummies from the classical mummies we're used to seeing. After applying them, the embalmers positioned the body in the hot sand of the Egyptian desert. The mummy would stay there, exposed to the scorching sun. It was a perfect combination. The intense heat of the desert sun worked in conjunction with the preservative properties of the balm. Together, they dehydrated the body and prevented decomposition. That's why Fred and other prehistoric mummies remain in a fetal position, with all their organs still inside their wrinkled bodies. Compare this to the classical mummies we know from the later period. These were laid in a straight position and buried in elaborate tombs away from sunlight. As Buckley explains, without the sun to help with preservation, later embalmers had to develop more invasive techniques. They needed to remove the brain through the nostrils. They had to extract the internal organs and place them in separate canopic jars. They used large quantities of natron, a type of salt, to completely desiccate the body. The entire process became much more elaborate, ritualistic, and time-consuming. But the essence, the central idea, remained the same: using natural antimicrobial substances to preserve the body for the afterlife. The discovery also revealed something surprising about the spread of these practices. The wrappings that Jones studied in the 1990s came from a region of Egypt that is several hundred kilometers north of where Fred was probably preserved. This means that prehistoric mummification techniques were much more geographically widespread than experts imagined. It wasn't an isolated practice in a single community. It was shared knowledge, transmitted, perhaps traded among different groups along the Nile Valley. But this leads us to an intriguing question. How on earth did the ancient Egyptians discover this recipe so long ago? Think about the challenge the first Egyptians faced. They lived almost 6,000 years ago, without modern chemistry, without the scientific method, without even developed writing to record their discoveries. How could they have discovered that the specific combination of vegetable oil, gum, and aromatic extracts would preserve a human body? Stephen Buckley has a fascinating theory. Some of these ingredients probably had symbolic significance at first, he speculates, but then they realized they had a preservative benefit. It's a powerful idea. Imagine that certain oils and aromatic resins were used in funerary rituals for religious or spiritual reasons. Perhaps they were considered sacred, connected to the gods or the world of the dead. The Egyptians applied these materials to the bodies of their loved ones as part of a farewell ceremony. And then, over time, someone noticed something extraordinary. Bodies treated with these substances decomposed more slowly. They maintained a more preserved appearance. Perhaps this was seen as a divine sign, an approval from the gods. Or perhaps the Egyptians were practical observers and recognized the pattern. Either way, what began as spiritual ritual gradually transformed into preservation technique. Symbolic practice found practical purpose, and thus mummification was born. Buckley lets slip that his team is currently studying ancient experimentation sites for embalming ingredients. This suggests there may be even more revelations to come. Perhaps we'll discover primitive laboratories where the ancient Egyptians tested different combinations of substances. Who knows if there are ancestral recipe books waiting to be deciphered? The meticulousness of this new study impressed even the most experienced experts. Ron Wade, retired director of the Anatomy Services Department at the University of Maryland, has a unique perspective on the subject. In 1994, he did something remarkable. He repeated the complete Egyptian mummification process on a modern human with funding from National Geographic. Wade knows intimately every step, every challenge of the mummification process. That's why his words carry weight. "I wish I had received this information when we were making our mummy," he admits. "That would have been interesting." So what does this discovery really mean for us thousands of years later? First, it forces us to reconsider the sophistication of prehistoric societies. We tend to think of ancient peoples as primitive, trying to survive day to day without much thought beyond basic needs. But this research reveals something different. The prehistoric Egyptians were experimenters, observers, scientists in their own way. They tested substances, observed results, refined techniques. They had sufficient botanical knowledge to identify plants with antimicrobial properties. They had practical chemistry to create effective emulsions, and they had social organization to transmit this knowledge across generations and long distances. Second, it shows us the extraordinary continuity of Egyptian culture. The same basic recipe developed 5,600 years ago continued to be used for millennia. Few civilizations can claim such consistency. It's as if the Egyptians had found something that worked perfectly and said, "Why change what's already perfect?" Third, it makes us question what else we don't know. If we were wrong about when mummification began by a margin of 2,500 years, what else might our ancient history timeline be incorrect about? How many other Freds are waiting in museums around the world, guarding secrets that could rewrite entire chapters of our history books? And finally, there's something deeply human about this story. The ancient Egyptians developed these elaborate techniques for a simple reason: love for those who departed. The desire to preserve the appearance of their loved ones, to keep them alive somehow, to ensure their safe passage to the beyond. Fred, lying in its fetal position for almost 6 millennia, is a testament to that ancestral love. Someone, long ago, cared enough to carefully apply that sticky brown paste, to wrap the body with strips soaked in precious unguents, to position the mummy in the hot sands with reverence. That care crossed the centuries. It survived empires that rose and fell, ice ages and warming, migrations and conquests. And now in the 21st century, scientists in state-of-the-art laboratories use technology that the ancient Egyptians couldn't dream of to finally understand and honor that ancestral act of love and preservation. The next time you think of ancient Egypt, don't just think of the grand pyramids or powerful pharaohs. Think of Fred. Think of the first Egyptians experimenting with oils and resins, trying to find a way to preserve those they loved. Think of the unbroken chain of knowledge that stretched for thousands of years, from master to apprentice, from generation to generation. And think about what this teaches us, that the human impulse to remember, to preserve, to honor our dead is as ancient as civilization itself. Methods change, technology evolves, but the heart of the practice remains the same. Fred is not just a prehistoric mummy. It is a window into the soul of ancient humanity, a reminder that our ancestors were as human, as concerned with love and loss as we are today. And now, thanks to the meticulous work of Jana Jones, Stephen Buckley and their teams, We know the recipe that made it all possible. The recipe that launched one of the most enduring and iconic funerary traditions in human history. It's a story that deserves to be told, remembered, and celebrated. It's a story that connects us across the abyss of time with those who came before us. And if you enjoyed this journey through the history of Egyptian mummification, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories about archaeological discoveries, mysteries of antiquity, and the secrets that the past still holds for us, till the next adventure through the tunnel of time.